This dude had a complete meltdown in my comments about subsidies and how my business wouldn't exist without subsidies. And so let's just ignore that and talk about subsidies and how they work and why they're a good thing. Chances are, if you've heard about farm subsidies, you've heard of them in a negative light, that they are the reason that we're farming all these bad things and why we're poisoning our food and why American food is so problematic for chronic health issues. And is that correct? Yes, but no, but yes, but no, which is my way of saying it's complicated. One of the lessons we've learned the hard way about the free market is that free markets are really bad at keeping prices stable. Unstable prices with things as fundamental as food are very dangerous for civilization. If you think the price fluctuations in eggs, meat, and other things at the grocery store are bad now with inflation, you ought to see what it would be like if we didn't have things like crop insurance and direct payments. People arguing against subsidies is kind of like people arguing against vaccines, which is, it's something you can only do because you're privileged enough to have only lived in a world where those things exist. So anyway, the strategy in the United States to keep prices of all food relatively stable is to subsidize a select group of very foundational crops that we produce here. Corn and soybeans being the major ones, but there are also others. Those staples are important because they form the majority of what people eat, and they form the majority of what the animals that people eat. The biggest way that these subsidies influence the food system is by convincing farmers in these major foundational crops to keep producing those foundational crops despite the risks. In a completely free market, those risks would be weather and disaster and price fluctuations from markets from either overproduction or underproduction. However, subsidies are not only encouraging the behavior of farmers, it's also encouraging behavior of agribusiness, and in many ways, not in a good way. The problem with subsidies is that while they do their job successfully of keeping prices relatively stable, again, the inflation that you're seeing now would be much worse without those price supports. While they're doing their job, there are also knock-on effects, side effects, unintended consequences. One of those side effects being, just for example, that corn is so cheap and abundant that food manufacturers are incentivized to put it in everything. This is why you see high fructose corn syrup being used not only as a sweetener replacement for sugar and honey, but also being added to things that don't even necessarily need sweetening because it has addictive properties. There is also a very fair argument to be made. Price subsidies in some cases have gone too far, have gone beyond just stabilizing the price of food commodities and have teetered over into political patronage. Ethanol is the big one. Ethanol is in your gasoline specifically so that all the extra corn we're producing in this country has somewhere to go. Agricultural overproduction also has lots of side effects, many of which are environmental. For example, when we need more farmland, we're cutting down more forests, we're disrupting more grassland, and that has consequences for the climate in particular, as well as for biodiversity and soil health. It can also affect the integrity of the family farming model itself by encouraging farms to get big or get out, encouraging farmland consolidation, and reducing competition. So yeah, anyway, farm subsidies are a lot more complicated than, oh, you wouldn't exist without them, you're on welfare, blah, 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 be quiet, and I hope this guy tap dances for the rest of his life barefoot on a bed of Legos.